Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here at FEBRABAN. I'm with Guilherme Ribemboim. Before Unico, he's worked in several big techs. He has a huge knowledge, and he's going to help us understand cybersecurity. We did a partnership with Unico. We measured how the leaders, how the companies are dealing with this subject, how important it is, the digital safety, the experience of the consumers. We're going to bring some figures and to analyze what is behind those figures. First thing I would like to ask you, a couple of years ago, we've talked about digital security. It was something of the IT department, and other companies said, well, that's a strategic option. Let's invest in it because it's a good thing to invest in. But people say there is no way out. Security is part of any development of products, any action in a company. How do you see that scenario? Good afternoon, Rafael. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure. The Unico is a company that has a technology for validation of identity. We are a leader in the market in Brazil, and we're always addressing issues of security and how we can generate confidence between our customer, the bank, the fintech, the retailer, and their end users. This is our core business. And when we started thinking about the survey we did with you, we were very curious to understand how these banks, our customers, thought about generating digital reliability between themselves and their end users. We understood that it was very important for the banks to have the customers' confidence, and we started thinking about this subject. We understood that digital confidence or trust that the bank has with the customers is based on 3 pillars. The first one is privacy. Of course, once the customer is providing their data to the bank, they want to be sure that that piece of data is safe and it's private. It's going to be used to generate value for the user who provided that data to the bank. The other pillar is security. If I open an account, I want to make sure that I'm going to be the only person that can access my account. I don't want that account to be cloned. I don't want anyone to pretend they're me and use that account as if they were me. So this is about security when we talk about creating trust between the bank and the end user. And the third pillar is the experience of the user. And why is that important? Of course, if something happens in my relationship with the bank, I want to be sure that I'll be able to solve that easily, and I don't want to spend too much of my time. So that's part of building that trust between the services that the bank has and their customers. When we started looking at that, that's what you have said, Rafael. These things are fragmented in the company. So when you think about privacy, it's with the privacy of the officer of the bank. When you talk about security, that's the fraud department, technology department. When you talk about experienced user, you are talking about the product department. So when you think about how the bank builds trust with the end user, this work is fragmented. So we wanted to do that survey so that we could get to a conclusion about how to address it. And it was no surprise that we got to the figure that 93% of the banks have that as something critical within their strategy. When we talk about banks, a long time ago, the relationship between bank and customer was something for 1-to-1. Today, you have banks all spread all over the digital world. Sometimes you're doing a transaction, you don't know it's going through a bank. or a company that validates identity, how can you orchestrate that without generating loss of time and lack of security? We developed the technologies that we offer in the market today in order to address these three pillars that we've just mentioned. So we are concerned about privacy, we are concerned about generating security, and also that when we do that, we will do that generating the best experience for the end user. We address this subject having a very clear strategy for each one of these three pillars. Just an example, the use of a service that our technology is used, and it addresses it very well. There is a product called ID Pay. It helps. It's a product that helps e-commerce to authorize a purchase that so far they were afraid to authorize because they thought that that the person who was buying that product on the e-commerce, they were not sure that that person was that particular person. So I was on the website of purchasing of airline tickets. I would put on my card, and the airline didn't clear that because they were afraid that I would be using somebody's card. And how do you solve that? You solve that by doing a data triangulation. If I know the face of the user who is purchasing, the CPF ID, and if I go to the issuer, I know that the CPF ID, that card belongs to that ID, I can do a triangulation. So I know that person is that person, they own that ID, and that ID belongs to the card. So we can tell the travel agency, do authorize that because it's safe. So we are addressing two of those pillars we had talked about. We address the experience of the consumer. If I'm a consumer and I'm purchasing at the traveling website, my experience will be different. I don't have to call to the credit card operation or to the e-commerce site. I'm not going to lose that trip because the price has changed. So my experience will be different because I do that triangulation, and I'm doing that in a safe way. We make sure that to the e-commerce that they can sell the product because we can make a mistake and we are going to take the risk and the financial loss for that mistake. In practice, when we make products like that using identity validation technology, we are building that trust that we've mentioned in the pillars: privacy, security of opening an account, and the experience of the user. So that's how we triangulate that using the technologies that we have. Just to give a couple of figures, we have about the authentication without friction. 90% of the respondents integrate digital identity to the product's experience, and 80% seek non-friction authentication. That's what you mean, I guess, because as far as I understand as technology researcher, it's a competitive environment. People are in a hurry. Sometimes 1 second or 10 seconds that they're losing, and that causes friction, that's financial loss. Do you think that the companies are understanding that? Yes. When I think about this subject, I think about bringing some data that can measure that. For you to have an idea, we've closed 2024 with 600 million queries of validation of identity at Unico. We are projecting closing this year 3 times that figure. Validation of ID by biometrics or by products that do not have cause friction, it's becoming a critical asset to generate that digital trust.
Então, os bancos,
So the banks, the retailers, the fintechs, the betting sites are using ID validation so that they can authorize the opening of an account or to doing a transaction for the customer. That's an effect that if you compare 600 million to 3 times more, that's what we expect to conclude to finish the year with.
naturalmente,
The second effect is that as time goes by, the banks don't want to ask for biometrics. The banks would like this validation of ID to occur without friction. For us to say, Rafael is Rafael, you can sell him a credit card or a loan,
idealmente, ela não
but ideally, they're not going to ask you to show your face, your biometrics.
existe a
So for that, you have the evolution of the facial biometrics, which is the adaptive authentication.
nada mais é do que a gente
The adaptative authentication, we do the same procedure with the same level of security that we did with biometrics without asking for biometrics.
processo
That's a process, that's a trend that we are seeing in the market,
anos a gente
and we hope that we will be able to see that happening
então para tentar
over the years.
prática
Just as a practical example, when you open an account, a bank account, you will have
vou ter o seu
you will have their IDs and passwords. As time goes by, when we understand that you are always using that cell phone or you are navigating with the cell phone in a very similar way, you hold it one way, you click at a certain speed. When we capture those pieces of data when you're opening the account
correntistas dos bancos, a gente
on the banks, we start capturing that piece of data and to have a database that we're going to use so that we don't need to ask you for biometrics for you to do the operations that you do,
pediu da biometria.
maybe with biometrics. That's the effect of the adaptative
Acredita que nos próximos anos
adaptation that we believe that it's going to happen more and more.
Da pesquisa.
The figure 67% of companies already use passive authentication, reaching to 82% in finance. Finance is ahead of other industries, but it's not so widespread as the first categories of the technology. So I ask you,
Pô, a gente começa
you said, well, we try and understand who are the users. There is all about privacy of the banks.
vocês enquanto
But as a middleman of that, people who validate that ID, you have a lot of responsibility about storing that data.
para
If we stop and think,
uma empresa como
a company like Unico, at the end of the day, our main asset is the capacity that we have to generate a reputation of our B2B
não tiver
customer.
nosso cliente
If our customer, the bank and fintech, is not safe enough about our services,
a gente não vai conseguir
we won't be able to get
cada vez
to where we want to get.
hoje. Então, para nós é fundamental.
So for us, it's critical
Então, assim como
to have that concern. So as the bank is concerned about privacy and security,
né, nós temos
we have the same thing. We have a technology, a robust, because at the end of the day, the data is what differentiates us. If you ask us what is Unico market leader in ID validation, our database of faces with the IDs are greater than the database from our competitors. So when we are in the market working with the banks, they're working with us because they know that they will build an experience for more people than what they have today. If we didn't adhere so much, then they would have to go through other ID validation processes. And that's why they work with us, because our database is more compliant.
Eu estou aqui com alguns dispositivos, né? Estou com um relógio
I have some devices. I have the cell phone, I have a book, I have a watch.
em múltiplos lugares.
We are in several places at the same time with several devices.
Como é a complexidade
How complex is it?
do entendimento de quem
Is this understanding of who am I, where I'm heading?
seja um processo em
I
evolução.
believe it's something that is evolving, but just for you to understand these challenges in building the journey.
Cada vez mais o nosso objetivo
More and more, our objective is for us to offer these services no matter what the journey is. There are technological challenges. We have talks that are very frequent with the market about the WhatsApp, because WhatsApp, Brazil runs on WhatsApp from the point of view of e-commerce and also customer service and regarding
bancária.
banking transactions. That is already something that we see that.
Às vezes você
There is a difficulty in doing an integration of a journey of capturing face biometrics in a technology in the WhatsApp. So we understand that the process will have to evolve towards that, but they won't
o pessoal do Meta,
need us. It will need Meta people so that we can build that journey.
a tecnologia que a gente desenvolve
But the technology that we develop is agnostics in terms of platform, because it depends on where we are being called to work.
capaz de construir
As we
determinística dizendo, cara, o Rafael
move on, we can say, well, Rafael is Rafael, or this person that is trying to use his ID is not him. So there will be an interoperability in the market. Yes, of course. And that's more in the front end than rather in the back end. If we were to capture the face of that user on the cell phone camera and the ID, we can answer to that client what is the result of that ID validation. How that's going to be taken will depend on where the journey of the customer is.
Muitas vezes, Guilherme, quando a gente ouve as empresas
Guilherme, we often hear from companies that work with digital security. In the past, the gaze on security was something reactive, in other words, putting out a fire. In our present-day, increasingly digital world, the study shows
seguro do dia zero,
that, for example, a safe environment on day zero is an environment in which businesses can be built. There's no point in building so-so and then correcting later. Yes,
a gente tem que pensar que
we have to think that some of the cost for a customer,
com o banco, seja
some of their cost with a bank, it could be tariffs and rates and fees
associado com
and interest rates. A lot of that is associated with fraud risk. If a bank reduces this to zero, then what will happen is some of the benefit will boost the bank's profits, but also some of it will be passed on to the end customer. So the topic of security and ID validation, being sure that the bank is not going to onboard
para uma pessoa que
a scammer or fraudster or somebody who is a defaulter, this will have a generic and economic positive effect, and this will be part of the bank's competitive edge. So they're going to start to look at ID validation strategically, because it's not just about the user's journey or experience or protecting their datum, but it's the benefit that they will have because the bank is protecting them against fraudsters. And
esse cliente final.
this will bring down the costs for the end user.
Inclusive, assim, a gente tem
If, for example, every year we carry out a survey and we can prove that we've driven down or saved more than 3 billion real in fraud, how, owing to the way that we're protecting the data validation ecosystem of Unico.
bancos brasileiros.
We work with 9 out of 10 major banks and nearly all the e-commerce and fintechs.
Das 10 maiores
9 out of the 10 largest banks are working with us.
trabalho de validação,
So when we're validating, we're protecting the ecosystem
valor para a sociedade.
and we're generating value for society too.
Histórica,
It would be interesting to have a historical analysis of this. Last year,
muito maiores.
we were looking at cases of fraud, and they seem to generate a downward negative spiral for everybody.
Os consumidores perdiam a confiança.
Consumers lost confidence or lost trust. And post-pandemic,
Ter algum tipo de contato.
there's now this need for contact with the digital environment. This reinforcement means that everybody gains scale in trust. It's more than scale, Rafael.
Efeito rede.
We could call this a network effect.
Que a gente vai captar
As we capture the data from our
bancos de
customers in the 9 out of 10 major high street banks in Brazil, as we gather all the data when they're trying to,
eles estão tentando abrir uma
when their clients are trying to open an account, for example, we're building a huge database
gente
of good players and bad players, good actors and bad actors. And we can start to separate the wheat from the chaff. Some of the population, for some of them, we can say this guy with this face and this CPF, in other words, individual taxpayer number, pass them as fit because they're a good agent. And then there are some others you say, no, this face is a problematic face. They've tried to pass themselves off in other places using CPF that were not theirs.
acontecendo na prática.
So in practical terms, what this means is that there's a network effect happening.
Acredita que estar presente em
Being present in all of these major banks and major customers with whom we work today enables us to be a competitive edge ourselves and build the network and better protect. I mean network in the sense of like protecting a window to stop kids falling out of it, like a net. Sometimes the frauds are very obvious, but there are some attempts which are extremely subtle and sophisticated. What's happening at the moment? What are the major challenges for you in terms of validating? That's a really good question. I think right now, today,
muito interessante da
the moment is very interesting to answer the question because we're we're sort of
que vão ser usados
on the verge of talking about deepfakes and AI technologies, where people are trying to circumvent systems.
aí
Last week, there was another breakthrough with a new launch. There was a whole buzz of videos about REL,
cada vez mais
and it's increasingly perfect. It's not a question of seeing is believing now, because seeing is not necessarily believing anymore. You're going to have to go beyond seeing in order to believe.
do nosso lado.
What, from our point of view, how do we work with this?
É uma área de cientistas que
Obviously, we have a field, as it were, full of scientists. Don't give any strategic secrets away to the bad guys, but it's like a stairway, let's say. A fraudster is going to build an extra step into the stairway. We're going to build another two. And they build one, we build two. So it's a race between the fraudster and ourselves,
certeza que ele
so that we can be sure that they will not be able to enter into the systems of all the clients that we represent, because we are the security of these clients today.
essa questão do
And once again, this has to do with
existe fraudador.
the net or the network effect, because when you know there's a fraudster trying to pull off a scam, we can notify the whole ecosystem. We can solve not just one specific bank-specific problem, but we can update all the other banks so that they can enhance their technologies. Supposing banks had 10 different technology suppliers, the fraudster would try one, he'd get away with it, he'd fail, he'd go to another one. It would be much less efficient, really, in terms of protection than it really is, than the fact that the banks are all working together in a network. And we believe that this enables us to stay out in front. But deep fakes are a key issue, and we have scientists working on this. I'm drawing attention to this issue, the quality and the sophistication of the frauds.
expressão aqui do efeito rede.
But as you say, you're calling it a network effect, but there's also a scaling up effect. The world is increasingly digital. How can you work with the architectures to make sure that
A esse mundo
attempts and responses,
A gente,
the responses are fighting back exponentially? I'm not going to go into the technology per se, but we have a very robust cloud-based technology so that we can scale up our work. Imagine if, to give you one example, practically speaking,
da final da Champions League,
at the end of the Champions League, for example,
9 das 10 maiores empresas
9 out of the 10 largest betting companies are working with us.
uma regulamentação
But in January, there was a regulation that
validação
obliged them to have facial validation when opening an account for their customers. So we actually signed on with all of them, and they have a peak volumetry. For example, during the game, and they have a screen of the odds, for example, and users who want to bet are betting. For example, there's going to be a goal, one team or another is going to win, or there's going to be a red card. That's the scale we need to create in order to be able to serve the market. It's one of our major concerns. We want to scale up so we can be resilient. Scale is a piece of data that enables a player to be competitive at this level. It's not trivial to achieve scale. It's expensive, in fact. I imagine it must, this growth has to accompany market demand growth. Another thing I wanted to talk about with you is
ganhos
we
ou
were talking about some gains and losses owing to fraud.
o dever de casa,
If people are not doing their homework, for example, could you tell us something about the loss,
credibilidade.
the damage to credibility? For example, business image.
Caso
You were talking about a case.
vazou
And for example, data, customer data leaked and there was an attack, for example. That's not just a momentary loss. It may kill a company's reputation.
foi, Rafael, então,
Yes, Raphael, I think this was one of the major
do nosso interesse de fazer
drivers of our interest in carrying out the study with you.
isso, né?
In practice, as I said,
Fragmentado
this issue was somewhat fragmentary and pulverized. So there was so-and-so looking after cybersecurity or another guy with customer experience or etc. But what you're doing is building a reputation metric. What's the reputation that a bank has
o serviço que ela está oferecendo.
with regard to the service they're offering their end customer? And security and privacy are two essential issues when we think of reputational impact.
Se alguém roubar os dados,
Privacy, obviously, if somebody steals my data from my bank, that's going to have a huge reputational effect on that brand. Because when I open an account, I'm assuming that the bank is going to protect me against leaks.
segurança. Se alguém se
Secondly, is security per se.
passar por mim,
If somebody is passing themselves off as me and they can go into my account and then, for example, transfer money, they can look at my balance or anything, that also has a huge reputational effect because in today's world with social media, that spreads instantly. So when we think of these two pillars, privacy and security, then companies are extremely wary and it has a huge reputational impact if they don't address issues correctly. I'm going to ask you a very quick question. With an overall view, what's your impression? For example, is it that only huge companies can afford to carry out these identity validation actions?
escalável. Você
And supposing the problem is scalable, can small and mid-sized companies be on side? Absolutely. The topic of privacy and security and user experience, they apply to the big banks, but they also apply to little niche companies that are offering financial or non-financial services to their customers. There's no doubt about that. And the only way we can be prepared is to be prepared to serve customers of all sizes. Over time, we've seen that this is a service For example, people can use our APIs and use our data and validation.
No fim das contas, qualquer de nós vira
Any one of us, all of us can become e-commerce very quickly, really.
Nosso tempo está esgotado.
Our time is nearly up, actually. We
só pra-
started a bit late. I'd like to tell people, though, that we're going to publish the results of this survey and technology review. I think it's today or very soon, in a few hours' time. I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much for this conversation and explanations.
Conhecer melhor.
It was great. I was glad to get to meet you and get to know you better. And good luck, everybody, in this trade fair.